draws that are gonna be used to semi-bluff. However, you're gonna have to build your semi-bluffing range thinking about backdoor draws as well, because well, there's not many flop draws you can have. And second of all, it's kind of nice if you can tend to focus your semi or bluff raising hands to backdoor equity. Then when your opponent calls on the flop after you semi bluff, you're gonna hit more profitable turn barreling situations. Whereas if you just do it, with anything, you're just gonna end up bet folding the turn a lot or check folding the turn a lot. The last thing I wanted to talk about is how domination danger, as we said, is really high on boards with Broadway cards. Um, yeah, so like Ace King Deuce or whatever. And domination danger is the least likely on dry light boards like 7-5-3. So you don't really want to have bottom set on Ace King Deuce, but if you had bottom set somehow on 9-4 Deuce, and that's just way better because you're gonna get it in against more over pairs and top pair with side cards, which you're doing really good against. Um, I ran some stuff in Pro Poker Tools about dry boards, and just wanted to complement some of the information I gave in last episode. So this question, how often do people hit the nuts or at least two pair on dry boards? So I talk about three kinds of flops, heavy dry, average dry, and light dry, and three different ranges, the nit or, a three betting range, the random or kind of like a cutoff range or whatever, and the loose opponent, so, standard loose passive opponent or a button opening range. So you can see here how the nit is gonna flop the nuts on Ace King 7 20% of the time, and at least two pairs 55% of the time, which is pretty high. That means you, against such a tight range, you don't really need to be uh, bluff raising as often as you probably can against that button opening range that only flops the nuts, 3.2% of the time, and only flops, at least to top to 28% of the time. So that's much better to attack that weak range. On a flop like Queen 7-3 Rainbow, then it's still gonna flop more of the nuts, queens, much more often than the other guys. But the two pair, he's now lower because he doesn't really play as many disconnected cards. Still, it's not that bad because he can still stack up with like aces and a gutter or whatever and be doing, decently against against the two pair combos. On 9-4 deuce, no one's gonna have a set of nines as often, especially the nit. And two pairs, he's definitely not gonna have two pairs as often as the 50% range. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting, also, when you're facing a race on 9-4 deuce rainbow versus a nit, you can use this information to if he's attacking you, then you can rebluff some of the time on the flop much easily than against a 50% range that will have a set of nines or two pair more often. And against those, you're gonna have to have a little bit more backup probably. All right. So next question: what is the winning hand type? I ran the same boards, and I ran them three-way with these ranges. Although changing the ranges here doesn't really change that much in the results. Anyway, on Ace King 7, a bare pair is not gonna, a pair of aces or whatever is not gonna, well, any pair is not gonna win that often. You're gonna need two pairs, trips, or a full house. That's mainly what's gonna win 87% of the time or whatever. So that's how few draws there are here and how important it is to have, the nuts or, middle set and not like Ace King or whatever. On Queen 7 3 pairs gonna win more often, definitely. There's also gonna be more two pairs, and this is, even though it's disconnected, this is probably just because there are gonna be less trips, I mean less sets. So the fact that there's less sets means there's gonna be less full houses. So if the board pairs like deuce deuce on this flop, it's more likely it's gonna be a two pair result, and I mean two pair is gonna win the hand and not like a full house. Whereas on ace king seven, if it comes deuce deuce, there's still a pretty high chance that someone had a set of aces or kings. So that's why these numbers are like that. Um, so yeah. On the lightest of these boards, our pair is gonna win much more often. Again, there's less trips and there's less full houses. So yeah, it was just interesting to see how more powerful a hand like queen plus overcards or nine plus overcards are on these boards than if you have like ace queen. You're definitely not gonna win a showdown that often in a three-way pot. And these numbers will obviously change depending on the number of players. If it's heads up, it's the pair and two pair are usually gonna be even higher, and straights are gonna go down probably. So the last question I have on dry boards is how often a 35% range have a hand versus hand equity of at least 30% on the flop. So I ran again three boards like this, and I ran a 35% range versus these hands, which are all top two. And this just demonstrates how vulnerable top two is on the lighter boards. 35% range is gonna have at least 30% equity on the flop versus 9-4, 40% on time. And obviously against ace jack, this is much lower, and it'd be even lower if it was like ace king 7. Because ace king, there wouldn't be any overcards to the top two pair. This about aces is simply a 35% range. Is going to have again at least 30% equity on the flop versus aces on this flop 9-4 deuce. Basically the same amount of times it has against 9-4. So 9-4 is not that different from just bare aces in this sort of situation. In this question, I guess. So that's definitely interesting. So we advance to chance, and now I can introduce what I consider dryish boards to be. So basically, dryish boards are dry boards with a suit or with a two-tone flop, or like these two first examples, or they're still gonna be a rainbow, but we're gonna allow more connectivity here, so they can have 13 wraps and stuff that they couldn't have on drier boards. Oops. Basically, well, in general, more draws are gonna mean less air, so they're probably gonna fold less, which means well, first of all, you have to think about where you're gonna do on the turn more often. You're gonna get to see the turn more often, and the turn is gonna change the nuts more often because they're wider boards than the last ones. So yeah, we'll talk about that in the next slides, but also your c-betting frequency is gonna be lower than on the dry boards. I think heads up, you still wanna be c-betting a high amount, especially in position, I guess. And well, that's not necessarily true. Let's just say heads up, you're gonna be wanting to c-bet a higher amount, especially against fear or fold opponents. And you're c-betting in a three-way pot, you're probably not gonna want to c-bet air as often, and you're gonna want to have some backdoor equity at least to fall back on in case you get called or whatever. So as you lower your frequency, your c-bet sizing can be increased a bit because your range is gonna be stronger. Alright, so I ran some ProPoker's tool stuff regarding suited boards because we're gonna look at them now. So how often does a 30% range have a flush draw on a two-tone flop? It's 27%. It's not really that low. It's not really that hard, especially considering people are playing mostly suited cards in the 30% range. When the pot is heads up, at least one player will have flush draw 50% of the time, and this is all of these ranges are 30% ranges. And when there's three players, at least one player is gonna have a flush draw 66% of the time. So yeah, on a two-tone flop in a 3 or 4 way pot, if you don't have a flush draw or top pair or an overpair or something, you don't really want to bet just ace king high or whatever, that often. For these reasons. Last question: how often does a player B have a flush draw given that player A already has one on the flop? And it's 21%. So it's not that uncommon for people to be in a flush draw over flush draw situation. That's why it's really important to try to be the one with the higher flush draw as much as you can. All right, so we're also gonna be looking at more straightening boards. They're gonna be rainbow, but still with added connectivity. On a board like Jack 10-5, player is gonna have how many outs to improve a straight on the turn. And we can see on Jack 10-5 he's gonna have 0 outs only 40% of the time. I got her 34% of the time, and open-ended 20% of the time, and a 12 wrap or higher almost 9% of the time. So on this board, you also in a three-way pot probably don't want to be c-betting with air as much. Just gonna have to check fold a lot of turns or barrel super lightly, and it's probably not gonna be as profitable. So yeah, you're gonna have to check, give up a lot. Not a lot, but if you don't have anything, it's not much point in putting in dead money that you're later gonna have to fold. On a board like 10-8 deuce, which is a lighter board than Jack 10-5, which I consider to be just like a heavy, dryish board. People are not gonna have a straight draw much more often, and the open-ended or 12 plus wrap is only about half the time than on Jack 10-5. So definitely a better board to be c-betting on with a wider range. And yeah, I thought it was just interesting statistics we could use later. Alright, so dryish heavy boards, these are gonna be the ones that people hit ranges, so the Jack 10-5 rainbow is here, and the other connected ones are, ace queen 4, which was a dry board, but now we added a suit. Anyway, it's kind of similar to the dry boards. Top and middle set are still frequent. What's the main difference? Well, now we have more draws basically. We not only have more straight draws, we now have more combo draws. So, for example, on ace queen 4, you can now have Jack 10, the king Jack 10 with a flush draw, and that's a pretty powerful hand now. It's basically close to top set in equity wise. And on king jack 6 you can have a wrap the ace queen 10-9, and you're doing okay against top set and stuff. So not only are we adding some really monster draws to the equation here, we're also adding just a bunch of weak draws like the open-ended and bare flush draws that are gonna allow people to float or semi-bluff raise much lighter. So yeah, there's gonna be more floating, there's gonna be some semi-bluffing, and the semi-bluffing ranges, importantly, it's not gonna be as polarized as in the driest boards. It's not gonna be just backdoor draws. These are actually gonna be flop draws. So you can't really you have to kind of stop bluff racing with air, because your opponents are gonna be able to semi-bluff ship the flop with more combo draws, or just like top pair with an open end and stuff that didn't really exist before. Again, as we said in the dry boards on episode 1, top 2 pair wasn't really that strong unless it's like ace king, and no one's really trying to put in much money on ace king 7 rainbow or whatever. But here, top 2 is even weaker now, because there's more combo draws. There's even just like set plus flush draw or top 2 plus flush draw that leaves bare top 2, really weak. On specifically these dry heavy boards, there's just not gonna be as many changes in the dynamic. People are gonna be stacking off on the flop more often because they're gonna have strong pieces, and these are the boards, people just start just flipping on the flop a lot. And there's not much you can do about it. The thing that will change is perhaps a little bit more floating. But people aren't really gonna put in money aside just because there's still a huge amount of top 2 and top sets that they're with a really strong draw you're doing okay, but with a marginal draw you're not really doing that great against top set or top 2 with some of your outs blocked or whatever. On average boards, same as the dry versions. Regarding top set, top 2 is again much less powerful. Bare top 2, I mean, and actually on these boards, since there's not many middle sets, top pair plus draw is gonna be one of the strongest. One of the it's gonna be one of the strongest parts of your range, or one of the strongest kind of hands in your range. Top pair with a combo draw or top pair with a big flusher on the suited boards. So yeah, semi-bluffing is definitely going to be less polarized, and as I was saying, the top of range will be weighted towards sets, combo draws, and big pair plus draws. There's still going to be some light semi-bluffing because people still do miss the board, and they can't really fight back, with even like top pair with 2 overcards and stuff. They can't really fight back as much because if you have top pair with a flush draw, they're really crushed. This last part where it says consider blockers to nut draws versus some opponents. I just mean, it's some opponents just really don't fight back at all when you attack them on these boards. So if you want to increase your bluff raising range, you might use on a board like King 7-3. If you have a hand with the ace of spades or the ace nut blocker, you can raise that more of use that to raise, since you're just taking away so many of your opponent's flush draws that he might shove or call with or whatever. But that's definitely with reads on your opponents. Lastly, there's the dry slide boards. Same as last episode. Sets are gonna be much less likely. So again, what's most gonna matter is gonna be your pair plus draw. So you wanna have, on Jack 4 deuce, two-tone for example, you wanna have aces and a nut flush draw. And on Jack 9-5 rainbow, you wanna have, something like King 10 with a backdoor flush draw. And I ran some equities here on the bottom where you can see, aces with enough flush draw on this board is, ahead of a decently strong getting in range. I mean we're flipping, but whatever. Same goes for King 10 with a backdoor flush draw. Against this range, we're still doing okay, 45%, and we dominate a bunch of other hands. They might people that aren't really good might stack off with. So especially if the SPRs are low, you're really happy with these hands on these boards. And yeah, it's not that easy to flop a set, but you don't really need to flop a set to dominate your opponent in a lot of these boards. So some other Pro Poker Tools stuff. These are basically the same questions we asked about the dry boards, but now with the dryish boards, so we can compare. The winning hand type, for example, on King Jack 6, 2 pair and full houses and trips are still 80 something percent, but there's definitely a bunch more straights out there. Obviously, since it's rainbow, there's not gonna be that many flush draws or whatever. On the second example, we do have a two-tone flop, the WWZ. That's what it stands for. So again, 2 pair trips and full houses are not as low simply because the set of faces is always there. But now we can see a flush will win 24% of the time. And you know, on most two-tone boards, that's around the number uh, that's gonna turn out for a flush for us. On another connected board, we see how straights are really high again, and you know, since it's a light board, two pair is gonna be higher, and trips and full house are gonna be lower since there are less sets again. And yeah. So the next question is, how often does a 35% range have a hand versus hand equity of at least 30% on flop? So if I remember correctly, in the dry board versus, you know, top two, it was only 18%. So here, just with the flush draw against top two without a flush draw, it's 40%. So you know, double what it was last time. On second sample, it goes up to 45, and then to 50% against Jack 8, discounting any hand that has a set of jacks. So yeah, it's definitely top two is much more vulnerable on these flops, and it's even gonna get worse on the weather boards we're gonna see in next episodes. I'm probably gonna have to stop using top two pair as a benchmark and just use top set, cause them wet boards are gonna bring so many draws. All right, so I can't really talk about, you know, how to play the turn during my series as much as I would want to. So I'll just try to do that with the hand history examples as best I can. But I do want to say, you know, as you play more PLO, you should definitely just get used to thinking about how the turn and the river are going to change things. And you could start out by simply just running numbers. So on 10, 8, 3 rainbow, you know, there's going to be 20 straight cards, or it's going to be around 41% of the time there's going to be a straight on the turn. The rest, you know, well, the pairing turns are always going to be the same, so just go 20% for the board pairing on the turn. And blanks are going to be another 41% of the time. So it's really, you know, kind of evenly split between these two. Well, yeah, okay. So on Ace Queen 6 two-tone, you can see the difference how there's much less straight draws with only a 9 wrap being available. Yeah, the 20 pairing turns are the same, and flush turns, again, this is gonna be, you know, just your standard number, 20%. So that means blanks are gonna be like 40% of the time. Now, this is where you should start, and then you should probably start considering the difference between the cards within each class. So, for example, on 10-8-3 rainbow, the blanks are deuce 4-5. Those ones are like definitely really blanks, super blanks. While the king actually brings a lot of, you know, top two, and it makes hands like king jack, queen jack. It makes it an open-ended instead of, you know, just a bear gutter or whatever. So it definitely interacts with the board, and as well as the ace, you know, a lot of people are going to be peeling the flop with like ace 10 or whatever. So take that into account. I guess the same goes for, you know, any of these. You know, the 10 and the 8s are going to be worse than the 3s, just because more people are going to have 10-8 when they're betting than, you know, 10-3, 8-3, or a set of 8s, a set of 10s. And regarding the straight turns, you know, there's also a difference between these ones. The 6, for example, only brings in one straight, the bottom end of the open-ended. You know, while the jack, it completes, you know, a bunch of straights, although they're all gutters. So there's definitely a difference between, you know, what kind of straight, how many straights each card completes, and what type of straight draws they were on the flop. Right. So yeah, I think the jack and the 9 are probably more likely to give people like 2 pair or 3 pairs, or just like pair and open-endeds, and not that many straights as the 6, 7, and queen probably. Although that might, you know, that still might have to do with the exact situation. Anyway, the main idea is you should build your range in a way that is prepared for what's going to happen on the turn and the river. using these percentages to guide your flop range. So if you know the flush is gonna be 20% of the time, then you do want to have some flushes in your betting range or your check raising range or whatever range. Whatever action you're taking to get to the turn, you want to have flush draws in there. You want to have some straight turns, and you want to have obviously some two pairs and sets, so you can barrel the pairing turns and the blank turns or whatever. Um, yeah. So when you actually do hit the turn, you are gonna combine this information with how your opponent, with how both of your ranges interact with the turn card and the exact SPR, obviously. That always limits what your options are and your opponent tendencies. The only thing I do want to say, there's definitely a difference between straights and flushes and board pairing turns, I guess. You know, when the turn is a straight, you know, flush draws and sets still retain their equity. So straights aren't, you know, they aren't as great as obviously sets and flushes. When the board pairs, obviously, and both straight draws and flush draws can be drawing dead, and when the turn is a flush, straight draws can be drawing dead, but sets still retain their value. So basically, sets always retain some of their value, while straights are always drawing dead against a better hand on a pair turn or a flush turn, and flush turns retain their equity against straights on the turn or whatever, but not against pairing turns. Alright, so we'll just look at some hands now. Alright, I open on the button with a decent button opening hand. I'm probably opening like 50% of my range or something like that. This guy, the small blind, was check raising a lot, so I decided to check back here, but this is a really dryish light board that you should be c-betting still frequently. So, you know, with a hand like this, I definitely wouldn't mind just betting and planning to barrel a lot. But I decided to check it back here against this guy because he was being pretty active, and I don't really want to call a raise or whatever. And I do have a ton of backdoor draws, like any 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 gives me some kind of straight draw. Obviously, the 4 and 5 are pretty much the best cards for me, probably. So yeah, anyway, I just checked back. If we were all deep or he didn't check raise as much, I would probably just bet here. So the turn is a 5 and they both check again, so they usually won't have straights. And I just have to bet here. I have I have to protect my hand. They can still fold, you know, 10s, 9s or something if they don't have a flush draw or anything else to go with it. And I just have to take a stab here. So I get check raised small by this guy. It's kind of weird because I didn't really expect him to have the straight. I expect him to lead out with it. But anyway, I still have enough equity to call a raise with the open-ended and flush draw, so I do call. And the rest is kind of standard. He shoves into me with the nuts on the river. So I actually wanted to talk more about his hand. Obviously pre-flop it's not a great defend. I think on the flop this is a pretty good hand to be check raising. He might have been planning to do so. I mean, if he check raised the turn, it's somewhat likely he was gonna check raise the flop. He just loved doing it. So yeah, that would have been you know, a decent check raise for him on the flop with all this backdoor equity, backdoor straight outs, you know, with the jack and the 6, and you know the flush draw, and you know he's short, so he's not doing that bad against if I do happen to just shove it in, unless I have a bigger flush draw like I did, but I was actually gonna fold this one, so you know he had a lot of fold equity on his raise. on the turn, I guess he could lead out, but he hates getting raised by either of us, although I probably won't have a straight that often. But still, I might peel with the range that I'm betting with. And then he will have to bet the river basically, and I guess it's just easier for him to win the hand if he check raises. So I really like his play. As is, I had 83% equity, and he was probably just gonna make me fold my hand if I missed the river. Although I was obviously stacking him on, I guess a 9 and any flush draw or whatever. I'm probably still, I'm not sure if I was gonna call on a king. Probably yeah, but I was definitely gonna fold. I don't know, maybe a 7 or an 8. I definitely was gonna fold, so I guess he makes a straight on one of those. Anyway, I really like how he played it. Just unfortunate on that river that I did hit. But yeah, kudos to him. Alright, so next hand. Alright, so this actually didn't play out as an interesting hand, but I thought it could have definitely been an interesting hand. I just bet 3 streets. I turned the nuts. He just called pretty weakly. So what I wanted to talk about this hand is actually the flop, and specifically his hand. I think, if I'm opening such a wide range on the button, he should probably, it would be fine to include this hand as a check raise, or at least a lead. The thing about check raising that I like is he's obviously ahead of all the pair plus draws that I'm gonna have. Even against this one, he has me in pretty bad shape, although my hand looks kinda good on this board with 3 overs and a gutter. So yeah, against my value shoving range like queens, eights, queen eight, and stuff like that, he's not doing that bad. I think he has somewhere around 35 or 40% equity. With his backdoor flush draw and double gutter. And he does have a blocker to the queen, so it's not as likely I'm gonna have queens or eights or sixes or whatever. So yeah, I think he's ahead of enough of my range. If I fold, that's totally fine too, because whenever he just check calls here, I'm probably not gonna barrel. The cards are good for him. Maybe the ace I would barrel a lot, and the queen probably. But other than that, I'm not barreling the jack or the 7 that light. The 10 and the 9, I'm probably not barreling that light either. So he's just giving me a free card with all my marginal 1 pair hands or whatever, and I'm gonna bluff him up the pot if, say, the turn is a king or whatever, and I do bet with whatever I have. I mean, he's just in a much more uncomfortable situation without the lead when he has to check the turn. So yeah, I think having this hand in your check raising range on this flop texture is pretty good. Since you're also gonna be check raising some other, combo draws. The other thing that's actually kind of nice about check raising is I'm gonna be really tempted to peel light on this board because I know how many straights are gonna come in on the turn. Any 4, 5, 7, 9, Jack 10 makes a straight. So knowing that and with position, I'm gonna be more tempted than I'm gonna be really tempted to just call and try to rep something. So if he knows I play like that, if he can check raise and on a 7 or a jack, then he can check, and I'm probably gonna take stab with a big part of my range, so he can then check raise the turn. And yeah, I think that would be kind of nice. The worst thing about check raising the flop is how you play on a 9 or 10 turn, but I think you can probably bet fold. If you think I'm peeling wide enough on the flop, and I'm not gonna be like semi-bluff shipping the turn, because your flop check raising range is still gonna have a bunch of straight draws anyway. So it's not like if you barrel the turn on a straight card, you're not repping much. I mean, you definitely are. So yeah, I think probably just bet folding on those cards. Probably also on a king and stuff. So yeah. As is, obviously I hit Jin on the turn. After check calling the flop, also I think he should just bet the turn himself, just leading to me, because his check calling range has a ton of straight draws, so I'm probably just gonna check back the turn a lot if I didn't improve, and he's just gonna give me a free card again, with all my flush draws, or just like some queen, king, queen, jack, or something that have some two pair outs or whatever, or straight draws. If I had 8, 7, 6. Anyway, he's just giving me a free card a bunch of the time, and if I do bet like I did, like he can't really check raise, he has to kind of check call, but it's not that great because now I know he probably just doesn't have a set, and it's hard for him to get value on the river. And that's played, check call the flop, check call the turn. I think everything got there, and it doesn't really make sense for me to be bluffing here. So I think he just folded two pair, even though I'm giving him a good price. But yeah, he called down. So yeah, it was basically a flop thing. I think you should let me run an equity real fast. All right, so this is the equity I ran. This is the board, his hand, and my stacking off range on the flop or something like it. I guess this is a little bit light. Anyway, he still has 40% of 40% equity, so he's not doing that bad. And if I do stack off a bit lighter, like with that type of hand or whatever, that's probably too specific to make any changes. But if someone's stacking off lighter, at least calling with that, still has 44% equity. The other thing I wanted to run here is actually how often I am going to have a hand like that. And I think I have to run it like this. Yeah, so for example, this is just, I think I'm asking how often am I actually gonna have a hand like this that I want to stack off, and it's only 11%. So yeah, I think this is an easy check raise. Even, and he can fold out better hands. Like if I have a bear or just like a weak 8-6, or even like a really weak queen 6, which I might, like a queen 6 5-4 or something. I'm opening from the bottom, then I'm just gonna fold that probably against a tight check raising range on this board texture. Just isn't doing that well. And if I do happen to have like kings or aces, then I might fold that as well to a check risk. It's not gonna play well on the turn. I'm not gonna improve often enough unless I have some kind of secondary equity or something. So yeah, I thought this could have been a really interesting hand. With if I get check raised with this hand specifically, I'm in a really tough spot with a gutter and 3 overcards and a backdoor flush draw. I mean, I kind of want to call just because of what I said earlier, that I'm gonna have some bluffing cards here with the 5 or the 7. I think some of the time. So so he might have gotten me to put in money, with 30, with not with a dominated hand basically. And obviously equities aren't the whole story. He's also gonna play well on turn on a diamond or on a 7 and a jack. He can induce a stab from me. He can even go like check call, because I'm definitely gonna be betting twice if he just check calls the turn and the board doesn't pair on a 7. So yeah, could have been a good hand. Alright, next hand, this guy opens. I don't mind 3-betting here sometimes, but we're deep, and he's actually a pretty competent player, I think. I'm not 100% sure. So I just flat. This guy is pretty bad, so I just want to play a pot with him. We both check, and this guy bets. Now, obviously, have a ton of backdoors. I hope you can start identifying that by now. So I'm just gonna put in a raise here. I'm out of position, but with this guy behind me, it shows a lot of strength, and we're deep, so I'm gonna be able to three barrel, which is definitely good. If we were only 100 BBs deep here, I might not be as excited because this guy will stack off later, and so will this guy, and I won't be able to barrel as much. In any case, the board pairs, so really good result for me, I guess. I think this guy knows I'm semi-bluffing with some straight draws on the flop, but obviously I'm also gonna have, Jack 7 or Jack with something else to go with it. So now the board pair, you don't really have to bet as much because he knows he can be drawing there with his straight draws. He can't really have a flush draw. So I just bet at 29 and he folds. So yeah, on this board you can still just semi-bluff with more backdoor equity. I did have a nut gutter also, but didn't really want to check call the flop out of position because I know I'm gonna get barreled. Although at this stack size, you might be able to check call and then check raise some turns. But I'd rather just include sets in my range on the flop and just barrel more. And here, if the turn was a 9, or the turn was a club and I bet again and he called and the river was a 9 or a card that gives me a straight or something, I'm probably gonna check to try and do a bluff from him, and I'd be check shipping or check calling or whatever. I mean, yeah. So yeah. Next hand, this guy is tighter. It's a tight reg. He does open the button pretty wide though. Yeah, 43%. So anyway, this is a perfectly good three betting hand, double suited, good connectedness and high card strength. So I hit two pair on somewhat of a dry flop, and I actually check here. I'm not so sure I like my check. This is a dry enough board that I'm definitely gonna be c-betting with air a bunch. Although specifically against this opponent, checking the flop might be okay. He does know. I think he's a decent opponent. And so if I have a pair of aces here, the good aces pre-flop, but now not so good. I'm not really that excited about betting because I know this guy's gonna float me a bunch. There's too many pair plus, gutters and sidecards hands that are gonna be, or just like pair open-end that are gonna be shoving or floating me, and it's kind of getting to awkward spots with a lot of my range. But it's dry enough that I don't think he's gonna be stabbing, because I could just as easily be trying to go for a check raise with a lot of my range. If he stabs enough here, I think it's definitely good. But I'd rather do this flop check raise move in a 3-bet pot when the flop is a bit wider, and he's more likely to bet because he knows my range doesn't really interact with the board. As is, my 3-betting range does interact a lot with this board. 3-betting rundowns, probably 7, cards are at 8 or higher a lot, and I can't really be that scared with aces against such a wide bottom range. So anyway, I think the check is okay, but definitely a standard should be to just bet there. He checks back, which sucks, but the turn is okay. Now, this is where turn playability comes in again. If I bet, I hate to get shoved on. I think he will shove with even like 9-6, although maybe not, but probably. Just because it's not that likely I have a Jack 9 type of hand, but I will have it like Jack 10, King 10, King Jacks and stuff. So he might shove a 9-10, especially if he has something to go with it. And if I do bet, and he calls, then he will have some. He might just call with his 9 6s, and I don't really feel that good about barreling. I know he's gonna call down with some two pairs. Um, just because if I bet here and the river's a deuce, and I bet again, I'm repping just Jack 9 or 9 6, but that would probably see bet a lot of the time because it will have some connectedness with these other cards. So anyway, I don't think he can really stand to check back again, just because now the board really has gotten ugly for my three betting and then double checking range. If I have a bear or bear aces or whatever, I'm really just gonna check fold here a lot. So I decide not to lead and have to make a decision against a raise or a call. I decide to check again, and he does bet. So the great thing about three betting these hands out of position is it allows you to do this sort of stuff. And that's I guess another reason why analyzing board texture is good for you. It kind of makes you know what kind of pre-flop hands you want to be playing, because you are going to get into these situations a lot where you want to check and make your opponent check behind when you have the weaker part of your range. And to accomplish that, you're going to have to be doing some check raising. So you want to check raise with hands that are doing okay against the nuts and that might be dominating some of your opponent's hands. So here, it's kind of hard to dominate some of his hands, but I definitely do have a bunch of equity against the nuts, probably like 35%, 30% or 35%, and he can be bet folding queen 10. And I don't know, he just might get it in bad sometimes, if he has something like, it's kind of hard, queen 10 jack. Yeah, just queen 10 jack with a jack high flush or something. I don't know, it's kind of hard to have a dominant hand, but he just might get it in bad. The main thing though is we do get to, out of a weak range, we do get to get some more money out, and we do establish a dynamic here where I'm not going to be check folding every time where I check twice on these really dynamic boards. And against a reg, that's a really good situation to be in when you're out of position. So really good hand until this guy leads. So this guy is, kind of tight, not really that aggressive. So this is a perfectly good spot to just flat. I actually made a huge mistake here and just shoved. But he doesn't 3-bet, so he definitely can have any kind of set. Obviously, aces is pretty likely actually when he leads in a three-way pot. And he led for 10, so it's not like he's gonna show up with a weak range here. So I wouldn't surprise if he's only leading like top 2 plus, or just like ace-9 with queen 10, ace-9 with 10-8, maybe something like that. So yeah, this race is pretty bad. I wish I had just called, and the other reason for that, well, there's a few more reasons for that. This is why it's such a bad mistake. The reason is if I call here and this guy shoves, I get to see what the original better does before I act. If he shoves, I can get away from my hand, because my my board outs are probably not live. My two pairs probably not good, and my straight outs are probably gonna be duplicated by either or both of these guys. So if I just call here and they both shove, I only put in $10 and I can get away from my hand, being pretty sure that I don't have enough equity to get it in there. The other reason is obviously if I call and this guy shoves and this guy folds, which I don't think will happen often, we have an easy call. And also if I just flat and this guy folds, well, now I'm in position, I can rep a ton of straights. Obviously the king and the 8 are good for me, but if he checks on a 10 or a queen even, I can start turning my hand into a bluff because if we're assuming he has a lot of aces up, then on a queen or a 10, then I could go bet, and he's probably just gonna have to check call, check fold the river a bunch. So yeah, definitely a situation where you just wanna call. And as is, yeah, I did have 40% equity, which doesn't really make it a huge mistake, but there's just a much better way to play this hand, and I'm not sure why I shoved, but it seems pointless. Yep. So on to next hand. ISO raise with kings, pretty easy against a shorty. Very loose big blind calls, and now we hit this sort of dryish light board where obviously I'm not gonna have a set or two pair very often, but it doesn't really matter because I have an overpair and a gutter, and I just crush a lot of Jack 10 8s, 7 8 9 10s, or whatever things they want to get it in. So even if we're 100 BPs, I'd be fine. I'd probably be fine stacking off here, especially if they're somewhat aggressive, but with these stack sizes, it's even better. So he just calls. Probably doesn't have a set. Oh, I actually made the mistake of betting 10 here instead of something like 9, 9, 15. So this guy shoves I can reshove, but I was probably multi-tabling. Anyway, not the greatest card. It's sort of a blank in regards to straight draws and whatever. And he checks again, with a nut flush draw now and a double gutter actually, and this SPR, I don't think there's a reason for me to be scared or anything, so I think it's just a big bet, committing. I'm never bet folding, obviously, and the ace obviously hits my range, but this guy isn't really thinking about that. But yeah, I just want to get value. I don't think he has. If he has an ace, obviously, then I still have a bunch of equity. If he has aces up, even the kings are good, and double gutter and the flush draw. But if he doesn't, then I definitely don't want to check behind and give him a free card. So I bet and he calls, especially being a loose opponent. You don't really want to give them free cards if they're still willing to call pot-sized bets or whatever. It's kind of good he didn't shove the turns. Makes me think he doesn't have aces up, but I don't think he's folding an ace on the river. Just like a bare ace, and the 3 is a really good blank, so I just check it down. I think I win most of the time. And I do win. He had the 9 wrap, which, against kings with the 9 wrap, you're not doing that bad. But just because I had the 10-9 blocked, the backdoor flush draw and stuff, I definitely had him crushed. And he thought he was calling with equity against aces or whatever. But he definitely wasn't. And he should probably just shove the flop anyway, just because it's kind of face up what he has, since he would shove sets and two pairs, and he might just get some fold equity. As he is, on the turn, I'm really crushing him now, and he still calls a pot-sized bet, and he loses on the river. So I don't know, just a spot where on this turn you don't really have to check behind. Obviously on a queen, king, ace, any card actually that isn't an 8, 9, or 10, any other card, you're just gonna be betting the turn there. Alright, so this is the last hand. This is a pretty short one, and I just wanted to, how we talked about how nits don't really hit these boards often enough. They're just not gonna have the nuts, or a two-pair hand almost ever here, since he's opening 8% or whatever. So even though he bets big, it's kind of easy to just raise here. And I guess I could also float, but I don't really want to give off the image of just being weak and floating because the board is kind of light. So I just raise. I do have some backdoor outs. The six of diamonds is kind of a blocker for a few straights there, and yeah, so I don't really have to raise that big even with the flush draw, just because I'm basically relying on fold equity. I think he's gonna ship a lot of overpairs plus flush draws or overpairs plus other stuff. So, but yeah, he just folds. So, definitely be willing to attack people that aren't gonna hit boards with their ranges. Um, and that's kind of the downside about having such a narrow opening range. But yeah. Anyway, that's the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned some stuff, and you know, give me any feedback you guys want, and I'll be sure to check it out in the forum. This is Oresto for This is Cracked.